All right, so if we're doing our warrior training practice, or even if we're, well, you guys aren't in a beginning practice, so we will talk about the beginning aspects of the practice, and it's going to be a great reminder, I'm sure. The nature of attention is what we're going to talk about on Monday, and then we'll have another group study. But if you're doing the warrior training, you've identified your battlegrounds today, you've intended your points of attention in advance, we have a mantra ready to go, something that we're going to say to ourselves to redirect, and I'm assuming you guys have done all of that. Shayna, Ida, Carly, Karen, yes? Can I get some Okay, Ida has. So the moment I wake up, I go into this little thing I do where it involves a little bit of vision, a little bit of breath. It's a little bit of my laying down mode of meditation where I start breathing from the belly. But I wake up and I immediately interject myself into my practice right away. I waste no time. I know what my points of attention are going to be today because I'm doing this thing that I call a hydrostasy practice. And I know what my points of attention are going to be. So I just immediately start to do them. I start to intend them right away. Carly, Karen, what are some of yours? Shayna, what are some of yours? Do we have points of attention that we're planning to engage today? Because that's what this is. It's a T practice. Yes, but I tend to use similar points of attention. I think I need more tricks. It's possible. So if you tend to use similar points of attention, then definitely developing more tricks is a good idea. But the thing is you kind of know how your day is going to go, where you're going to be, what kind of environment you're going to be in. So I can give you tricks that I do, but that might not be the same environment that you're going to be in. What's something you're going to do today? Where are you going today? What kind of shit do you have to do on a Saturday?
Today I'm just staying in and studying, and I'm going to try and get out for a walk, because yesterday I just studied and then I realised I felt a little bit stagnant because I hadn't had any exercise or fresh air. But by 4 o'clock here it's dark. So if I go for a walk, it needs to be done before, ideally.
Okay, so I'm just going to mute for background noise, and then
Okay.
if you have any questions. So the walk is easy. So there should be tons of points of attention. Is that are you good with that one? So with walking, of course, you're going to be doing your fox walking. We have structural integrity, certain types of breathing, certain types of posture, extending with our attention on sounds. Maybe there's still some birds in the winter. Maybe there's certain winter sounds that they're just not as consistent, or they're just not as present during the summer or the spring. Does that make sense, Carly? So the walk should be pretty easy. Fox walking is something that, I'm sure that you've been doing up to this point. So your walk is probably going to be pretty mindful, right?
Yeah, I do all that easily when I'm out in nature. But sometimes I feel if there's something in my life that's a concern, as much as I use all these points of attention and I can really connect in the moment, I can feel the energy and everything else completely in the moment. If there's something that's concerning me, it's almost like that automatically becomes a background trick of attention, but it's a negative background trick of attention. So it might be, there might always be a little bit of worry or a little bit of fear in the background, and then I'm coming out of that and connecting, but then it's that fear feeling coming back.
Right. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, that
It's
does make
not a
sense.
good background trick of attention. It's probably not even classed as a trick of attention, but that's how it feels. Instead of peace, it would be the other thing.
Yeah. No. So I'll just background, but that makes perfect sense. So essentially, no, you're right. That's not a point of attention because you're not deliberately highlighting that. So that's not a deliberate, intentional, but it is still pulling on your attention. And I can completely understand that. So that's probably going to need the rule of three. So the more that we feel that pull, the more that you're going to have to use something word-based. Does that make sense? So while you're walking, you're doing your connection, and then the more you feel that pull, the more you look at that pull and you smack it with a word intention, something, like there's nothing left to think about. You know, this issue will be here when I'm done walking. This issue will be here when I'm finished. I don't need to think about it right now. So that sounds like a battleground to me. And there could be a point in this practice where you are rule of threeing a lot. Does that, I mean, it's just the way it is, because the mind creates a pattern and it gets used to that pattern, and that pattern is like a suction. And the more that we start to do something else and we start to create a new pattern, that old one still hasn't completely untangled. So as you're going throughout the day, when you feel the pull back towards something, that's important, or something that you think you need to think about, then that is very likely going to be a moment of rule of three. That's really all you can do with it, because the cognition's not functional, it's not serving you in the moment, and that feeling is going to linger and gain momentum if you don't do something with your attention that allows it to dissolve. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just texting, but it takes too long. Yeah, that makes complete sense. I suppose I find it difficult if the worry or the fear, okay, it is my fault and it is my pattern, but it's being backed up by events or truth or things that I'm experiencing every day. So it's, it is happening, even though I'm creating it in my head as well by keep thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So then it feels like I'm ignoring it, which is obviously based around control. I understand.
Well, if
but
you
that's
understand
the dilemma. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But if you understand that, then there is a word-based something that you can say to yourself. You can start to use productive self-dialogue in all of those situations, and you can start to reinforce what you, in air quotes, know. So if you know that this cognition, the thinking, is not helping anything, then you can reinforce that. You can speech that to yourself. Does that make sense? So you can start to quote everything that you know to yourself. So what you're telling me, you have to tell yourself. You have to reinforce it using verbal cognition. So, events that are happening around you. We're in a pandemic. We have people acting crazy. There's all of these things that are occurring. And, there could be a variety of mantras and things that you can say to reinforce. So people are acting crazy. And I can just remind myself that has nothing to do with me. Yes, I have to navigate it, but it's not about me. Everything isn't about me. Does that make sense, Carly? So if I were in the Seers training, any thought stream about self and other, I know isn't serving me. I know that. Like, I'm putting that in air quotes. I know it. So when I find myself doing it, I have to remind myself of what I know. And that's actually starting to begin to polish your voice of power or inner guru. That voice will start to reinforce when you're doing things with your mind that are opposed to the practice, no matter how important you think it is the thing. So, another way that I would, conversate with myself is any amount of thinking just going to solve this? Am I just going to be able to think this away? I know that I can't. So if there's situations going on in the world and there's, all of these different things that are occurring, and it seems like it's the interaction of society, not just you, not just your creation. You're in a co-creative bubble. So there's other people that are creating shit around you, and it might not be something that you want. You have to navigate and adapt and change. And reinforcing what you know through the form of a mantra as a part of a rule of three can help you keep your mind focused on your practice. It won't do it on its own, though. So if you don't do this, the mind will just continue to go back towards just the thought. You're just going to be thinking about it, and you're going to be trying to figure it out, and you're going to be looking for solutions, and then that is trying to control and everything you just said. So if you can identify where the thinking is dysfunctional or the direction of your attention is dysfunctional, voice that. Like, say it out loud in your mind that no, this is not going to help. No amount of thinking about this situation is just going to make it all better. It's making it worse. And that's a mantra. In a manner of speaking, it's a mantra, but it's productive self-dialogue. Not necessarily positive, but it is reminding you of what is occurring, what is going to happen if you keep on blowing this up in your mind. If you keep on focusing on it, it will get bigger and bigger and bigger and heavier and heavier and heavier. And guess what? You still haven't figured shit out. You still haven't thought of the one sentence that makes it all better. You still haven't thought of the one, word construct that is just going to make everybody bend to your will and start being kind and nice to each other. It's just not going to happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes complete sense, and I understand that. And I have been trying to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it all gets confused in my head, like, because I didn't know whether it was okay to kind of reinforce what was going on by using mantras that related to the situation that felt negative, or whether I should just be completely changing the subject, even if it means I'm just saying brown door in the kitchen, brown door in the kitchen, something stupid, just to change whatever's going on in my head.
No, so that is a technique that somebody else might recommend, and if it works, it works. But typically, brown door in the kitchen isn't going to have the momentum necessary to redirect your attention.
Yeah.
So if somebody's punching me in the face saying brown door in the kitchen ain't going to do shit.
Yeah.
And you're punching yourself in the face with that cognition. So no, brown door in the kitchen isn't going to work. But you can reinforce your principles. Keep it principle based, the principles that we talk about.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Does that make sense? But
Yeah.
you absolutely, the cognition can be about the situation. So let's say a customer is berating me like they were. We had a patient at work and they were just unloading on me. I said to myself, do no harm. This has nothing to do with you. This is just, they're expressing themselves in a very dysfunctional way. Be quiet. Don't take it personal. Now is the time to be silent. Anything you say is going to make it worse. That's about the situation, isn't it?
Yeah, and that helps you because it reinforces.
It reinforces my practice and what I should do. And I'll tell myself, just breathe smoothly, close your eyes, feel into your body. Everything's going to be fine. This has nothing to do with you. So that is a little bit different than a mantra, but it's what I would start to call productive self-dialogue. Not necessarily positive thinking, although positive thinking can work sometimes, but not if somebody's punching you in the face. You can't just say everything is working out for me when somebody is literally punching you in the face. It's not working out for you right now. You're getting punched in the face. So sometimes these magical, positive, that's too removed from the current stimuli to be powerful in your experience. So absolutely, if you are experiencing something specific, go ahead and let the cognition be specific that points you back to the second ring of power. Remember, that points you back to the practice in the second ring of power so that you just don't go from one type of thinking to another. Notice in my mantra, I said that this has nothing to do with me. Just pay attention to my breath, pay attention to my body, and do no harm. Now is the time to be silent. I'm reinforcing that and I'm doing it. So my attention is going where I'm reinforcing it to go. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes complete sense. There must be times though when it is beneficial to respond in a way that isn't necessarily angry or retaliating in that way, but just stating where you're coming from, because that can diffuse the person sometimes.
Yeah, it can. And well, just the more that you learn to adapt, the more that you learn to pay attention, the more you'll learn what to say and potentially what not to say.
Okay.
There is a time to be silent for sure, but I also keep in mind the four voices. I can't meet that customer with the voice of power. They're not in the state to be receptive to the voice of power. That's not going to be taken, how I intend it. And I can't meet them with the voice of creativity because they're not in the position to accept that. If they're angry, they're in an unconscious state. And I'm not going to get angry and meet them with anger because that's unconsciousness with unconsciousness. I will deliberate folly. I'll regain, attention on my body, on my breath, and I will deliberately, intend my attention. And maybe I'll say something that's just, not really a voice of power or creativity, but it's also not unconsciousness. It's just going to be
Mm.
something that I call deliberate folly. Everything's going to be okay, or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
sometimes sometimes the tendency with arguments and things like that is we indulge self. I have to be right. I have to prove my point. You may never prove your point to another human being. You don't know. That's the perception of the hawk. We don't fully know. So if you think you're right and you think I'm wrong and you really want to prove that to me, that's actually just indulging your sense of self. It's not stating your truth necessarily, or you know voicing your authenticity or anything like that. No, you literally could just be trying to be right, and that is just indulging in the sense of self, which creates the sense of other. And then before you know it, we're violating all of our warrior training traps of thinking. We're comparing and contrasting. We're trying to figure it out. We're in psychological time, and we're thinking about our wants and our desires. And before you know it, it's a hot mess. And yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. I was speaking more, just your point when you're coming from your authentic self, but I don't think anyone would ever hear that if they were in that place anyway. So there wouldn't
Yeah.
be any point.
So I don't really get down with the multiplicity of self. So I don't really divide myself up between authentic, higher, or lower, or inauthentic. If I'm lying to you, that is my authentic self lying to you. Like, I'm always my authentic self. There's no other. What else can I be? This is my output. True, it might be phony and I might be lying my ass off, but that is what I am projecting right now. It's what I'm giving out. That is my output. It is me. Like, I have always been that. So I don't really divide myself up into these different pieces of higher self, lower self, male self, female self, whole self, light self, dark self, shadow self. I don't need to do that. There is just resistance. And if I am introducing resistance, then I am not complete. I am not connecting to the universe around me, and I'm not feeling the universe flow through me, then I am not complete. I am not. So there may be some body and there may be some mind, but until I place my attention on the present moment, spirit doesn't flow because I'm introducing resistance. Does that make sense? Introducing resistance or not introducing resistance. That is the only thing that I really look at in terms of, you know, being myself. It's just I'm either my product, I guess what I'm producing, my output is either with muddy, dirty resistance or it's not. I want it to be not, because if it's not, then I connect more, I feel more. Notice, Carly, that when you're thinking about those things, when you're engaging those things, you cannot feel the essence of the present moment. You don't feel the yummy timelessness of the moment happen. All that shit's gone. You
Mhm.
can't access it with resistance. So what we're looking to do is simply remove the cognitive resistance by engaging the present moment more. Does that make sense? So there's no multiplicity of self. There's either earnest with resistance or earnest with less resistance. Hopefully, very little. But that's
Yeah.
how I eliminate the multiplicity of self.
Yeah, that's true. And when I do that, the thing that I was worrying about seems irrelevant.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, why was I worried about that? That doesn't really matter.
So if you have proven that to some extent as an energetic fact to you, that 9 times out of 10 it doesn't really matter, that could be a new reinforcement stream for you, that you're about to get into that, and then you're like, no, this never really equals much for me. I'm going to go back to my practice, 3 or 4 points of my practice with breathing and mantra, and now you may have to talk yourself back into your practice quite extensively. We were
Yeah.
we have a lot of thought built up in the beginning, so it's most reasonable to work with the thinking rather than trying to eliminate it.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
And then I would just say the other point is, so that That is when you're going into the world and you're feeling the resistance. But when you're studying, that when I play a video game, when I do this right now, I'm paying attention to my throat, I'm paying attention to my structural integrity, I'm using defocused vision so that I feel my body in space and time. I am doing my hydrostatic practice while I do all of my mundane activities. That is essential as well. That's embodiment. So this practice, we have to do it a certain way when we feel our mind going back to the resistant patterns, back to that gravity that's pulling us back towards our unconscious habits, the three destroyers: the biological habits, the way we eat, the way we behave, biologically; social habits, the way that we interact with society, whether that's watching the news or going drinking and dancing, and maybe it's, fox walking with friends. These are social activities, but social engagement. Fox walking wouldn't be a habit though, so that wouldn't fall under the three destroyers. But so biological habit, social habit, and the habits that you've created already. If you are not engaging the present moment on purpose, you are feeding those three destroyers. You're doing one or the other. So if throughout the day when you're studying, maybe you look at the whole book, maybe you hold a sound, you listen behind you, you have an entire body to pay attention to. So you say, we need more tricks of attention. Well, you got hands, you got wrists, you got elbows, you got the upper torso, you got legs, you got feet, you got head, you got eyes, you got ears, you got nose, you got so many points of attention just on your body that you could be paying attention to while you study. So you could be alternating between focused vision and defocused vision. When you feel your mind starting to wander from your studies, you can use a mantra that brings you back. This is my dedicated time to study. I'm just going to study, and when I'm done, it'll be fine. This isn't the end of the world. I have set aside 1 hour to do my studies, and I'm going to do it. So back to my practice, back to the studying. Smooth breath while I read this bullshit that I don't want to read. Smooth breath while I read this bullshit that I don't want to read. So there's ways to set up your practice early in the morning, and then there's ways to continue to engage your practice while you do all of your regular mundane activities. And then you'll notice that if you do those two things, you begin your day by practicing. And this is the cognitive practice. This isn't formal practices. I'm not talking about doing Tai Chi or sit-ups or, doing a morning jog. I'm talking about waking up and pointing your attention on purpose. The second you wake up, identifying potential battlegrounds, and then determining some specific points of attention. I like a note card so that I have things, a strong sentence or paragraph that points me back to the practice, that points me back in the direction of what I want to do. Now, if I do that, then when I go through my day and there's that pull of cognition back towards the unconscious thinking of our problems or the things that we think are super important, the things that we think we need to figure out, the situations that is this right or is this wrong? That's all an attempt to control. We know it. We have to reinforce that, redirect it. But if we build momentum throughout the day, is this making sense, Carly? If we do it in the little things, then when you feel that big pull, you're gonna react to it much better. Or when someone is like literally, maybe you get a flat tire, or maybe there's a storm and your window gets broken or something. These are things that we can't control. It's just atoms bouncing off of each other, and we have to adapt to that. So when the branch goes through your window, the mantra, hey, this is just happening. This isn't about me. This isn't, why is this happening? This is just nature. It's just the wind. It's just a window. What I'm creating is my response to this. That's my creation. I take responsibility. It's going to be fine. I'm going to learn from this. Just move forward. See, I'm talking to myself, but it'll be easier to react to that if throughout the day and all the mundane activities, we're finding deliberate points of attention. When you're cooking, when you pick up a handle, notice the handle in your hand. I like to play a game of weight. I can feel different things that I pick up. This is heavier than this. That's it. That's the game. This is heavier than this, or this is heavier than I thought, or just paying attention to the texture of things. Those are all valid points of deliberate attention if you do it on purpose. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure, that makes sense. And just one more thing quickly, because I know we've been talking for a while. You say that in different situations we should be using different tools. So are we always using something inside our body and something outside of our body at the same time, always?
If that's possible. Otherwise, I
Yeah.
recommend starting inside. So
Okay.
we have the point of attention 1 multiplied by point of attention 2. Point of attention 1, usually, for most people, there are some men that we may have to do it a little bit differently because they're not used to sensing inside their body. Sometimes men, just the way that they're raised and the way that they live, they don't do that very much. But I would recommend your first point of attention being an internal point of attention, something structural, the Dantian. If you don't know nothing about that, then your heart space. If you don't know nothing about that, then a little bit of breath. If you don't know anything about that, feel your feet, something. But yeah, I would start with P1, which is internal, and then I would extend to P2. So if I'm fox walking and I have the Dantian, then I'll extend out to the shadows or the leaves or the clouds or the horizon or the light source or something like that. So it's important for me to start with an internal point of attention and then extend to an external point of attention. And as much as your practice, allows, you don't want this to feel like you're trying to control or you're trying to force it. It's never force, but you don't want to, run up against the atrophy effect too much, too quickly. That's going maybe from one extreme to another. It just depends on the person. But yeah, eventually it would be great if you're able to hold or go back to. Hold is something that we talk about in the seers training. Really what we're doing in the counterbalance phase is we're learning to remember these points of attention. So Carly, if you can first remember an internal, play with that a little bit, probably use a mantra. I am aware of my hands in space and time. I have fingers. I have a wrist. I have palms. I have skin. I am alive. I can feel this. This is how I would talk to myself at the movie theater. I would go into the closet and just, I am alive. Like I am matter. I am biological. I am energy. I am alive right now and I can feel it. I can feel my existence right now. Does that make sense? So that would be internal point of attention and then external point of attention. I recommend going in that order, but there's some people who are just not used to paying attention to their body. So maybe for them, they would want to start with movement of the trees or the reflections or the square window or, the light source, the geometry of the room, you can come up with all kinds of things. The distance between objects, how much something weighs. I played with that. Like all throughout the day, I would just say which object weighs more than which, or is this heavier than I thought? So I pick up a scale and I'm like, oh, this is lighter than I thought. I'm just choosing to pay attention to the weight. That is a trick of attention. That's a deliberate point of attention. And it's just better than unconscious attention. It's not significant. It's not like it's like, oh my God, I've learned something about this scale. Not really. I'm just paying attention to it in a way that I wouldn't unconsciously. I would just pick it up unconsciously and put it over there and pay no attention to it. Instead, I pick it up and I say, oh, this has some nice construction and it feels nice and it weighs more than I thought it would, and I just set it here gently. That type of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we would do that and whatever we're focusing on as well.
Yeah. Now,
if we can.
if you can, now you're starting to get into the warrior training aspect of just do energy. So if we're looking to increase our intention and our will, which is personal power, and in hydrostasy, I'll talk about directing personal power. What can we do with personal power once it's accumulated? In the beginning, we're just looking to balance our rings of power. That's what our personal power will be used for. But then once our rings are balanced, now we can start to express personal power a little bit differently. But yeah, intention and will builds personal power, and an internal and external and eyes on whatever we're doing, paying attention to what we're doing, a mantra to keep you focused. If you start to wane, then yeah.
That's perfect. Thank you.
You're
Sorry
welcome.
if it was a bit boring for everyone else that knows all this inside out.
Oh, no, that's what group
I'm
study's
sure it
for.
wasn't, but
No, I'm
yeah,
sure it wasn't. I'm sure it's a good reminder.
I just need to recap. Thanks.
And so that's what we'll be doing for the rest of the year. So we have 13 weeks of basic alignment. And on Monday, we're going to talk about the very general nature of attention. And that's kind of what we talked about today in the very beginning when I said that to direct your attention is never force. You have never been separated. We're going to do, Ida, we're going to do Mondays, and this is on the website too. So I do have it written on the website. If you go there, you should be able to see it. But yeah, see, I'll share my screen. So the website's just a little bit different because I'm doing some building. But if you go to group study, this little page comes up. Nothing fancy. But it does have Monday and Saturday at 6 a.m. And if the time changes, I'll be sure to list it here. I know I said that before, but it's a new year. We got this. So Monday is going to be a focused topic where I talk about the nature of attention for like 30 or 45 minutes, and then we just talk about that, any questions you have. And then the group study, I'd really like to, like we were just talking with Carly, what are some ways that we can really start to iron out our practice? So Carly, you talk about points of attention. One of the things that I have started to do with hydrostasy, and I would recommend it throughout, is an object of power. And I'm sure, Ida, you would love this because you have your heavy rocks. I was using that, but I forgot it at work. But, you know, using the heavy rock as a point of attention, keeping it in your pocket, keeping it in your hand, that is a power object. That can become a valid, legitimate, wonderful point of attention. Does that make sense? Tiny ones can work, but for me personally, I have found that I forget about tiny ones because they don't weigh enough. I need something a little bit heavier so that I feel it in my hand. So we can sell those rocks in my art stand, Ida, and we'll call them power objects. Things to help you keep your attention on the present moment. You pay attention to it. You keep it in your hand. If that becomes a habit, put it down. You don't need it. But if it's not a habit, then you can keep it, you can pay attention to it, you can finagle it, you can fondle it, you can do different things with it. Fondle is a weird word, but you do know what I mean. So those are some practice points. Donna, Jean, how's it going? How can I help you with the practice today? Yes, Donna, please.
I've found it helpful. I think I heard it on Abraham, but I'm not so sure where I heard it, about the segment. And it at that moment in time, it resonated with me about breaking my day into segments. And I don't, it was just another trick of attention. And I didn't have, I had some ideas about it when I start in the morning and I plan a little bit for it. But as a result of doing this practice, some of it, like my walking from the car to the school building, is a segment of my day. And so because I made it a segment of my day, it's easy. I don't have to remember it anymore. Now I just choose what I'm going to do with that segment, or whatever I chose in the morning. Let's say it's light or whatever. Okay, let me look at the light as I walk from this to this. The change of classes, because there are bells that go off in school. So the change of periods, I can remember where's my internal point of attention, where's my external point of attention. So because I have a structured day, at least at work, making my coffee, you know, taking my shower, whatever I do routinely, I've labeled it in my mind as a segment. And in that segment, I can be aware of various things. So that's helped me prolong, you know, the practice all throughout the day, is because I've labeled my day into segments. So that helps remind me when I forget. And also my question was, I know in the beginning we were doing a lot of, oh, I forgot the term that you use, dedicated practices like the Tai Chi and a 20-minute meditation. And I've fallen away from dedicated practices. And in the beginning, they were easy to do. When I went to yoga class or when I did a meditation or some of the meditative type practices I participated in groups, it was easy to practice. It was when I stopped doing those things and went back to my daily activities where it was difficult in the beginning. I have the opposite issue now. I find when I'm practicing throughout the day, it is a meditative practice. It is a meditation. Being aware of my body and space, all the things that you just mentioned, the different tricks of attention, being aware of temperature, being aware of color. But I've let go of some of those dedicated practices. And I was wondering if you could comment on, I know all of it is accumulation and momentum, but if you could talk about the difference between what you acquire or what you gain or what is helpful about a dedicated practice of something physical or just sitting quietly in meditation as opposed to bringing it with you all throughout the day, how that differs and why
Yeah.
it's important.
So first, I think we need a note taker. So let's think about that. If there's somebody that comes to all of the study sessions, we could have a note taker because segmenting. Thank you. Segmenting is one I want to talk about later, or I just want to highlight. Maybe we could highlight that for the website. So send me a note about segmenting, Donna, and then I'll write up a little bit, and then maybe we could make a little blog post or something. Segmenting
Sure.
is dope. I love segmenting. I did segment. I still do. So I still segment my day, and it's a great way to develop a little bit of focus around each aspect of your day. Driving is different than when I'm sitting or standing and talking to patients. That's different. There's different
Yes,
things
it's not
occurring.
only a reminder, it's a rhythm. That it gets you in a rhythm of, I know we've talked about, it's a desired feeling to direct your attention deliberately. The feeling that comes from it is desired. So the segmenting doesn't feel like work because it's like, oh yeah, I want to be in that place. Oh yeah, I want to be in that place. So what's another segment? And I picked the easiest ones for me. Driving is one of the easiest ones for me. So yeah, segmenting really helps me. It's not work. It's helpful.
Yeah, and I think that'll be a good one to share with others as we develop the practice. So that's a perfect little addition that we can make over the week. I'll publish something about segmenting, or you could write it up, Donna, since it was your idea. Just write up a paragraph or two about segmenting and send
Sure.
it to me. That'd be great. So in terms of T, the complete practice, Donna, I do not offer any formal practices. So T, the complete practice, is 100% about embodying an informal practice. Does that make sense? Just that point that T, the
Sure.
complete, okay, so T, the complete practice does not offer any formal practice in the beginning necessarily. Now, if you want to do them, then by all means, intention and will accumulate personal power, and that's the bottom line. So if Ida is doing yoga, and she does yoga 3 times a week, and she's swimming in the sea, and she's doing all of these things, dope. That's great. You got intention, you got will, you're wanting to do that, you're expressing your desire, it's conscious creation, that is your boat, you can go float it. Does that make sense? So Gene, he plays tennis. If that's a mindfulness practice that really helps you engage, and that's a formal practice, by all means, I would recommend it. As long as it's not creating, this dissonance that you feel like you have to. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. Really, it's such a great point. It answers my question perfectly because I did those formal practices for years. And I remember in the beginning of this practice, I would say, geez, I find that place of peace in my yoga class, and it made me think I just have to do more yoga. Or I find that place that I want to live in during my meditations, during my shaman workshops, whatever. I just have to prolong that. I just want to elongate that feeling, or I want to bring it with me all throughout the day. And your approach with this is really quite the opposite. It is, where can we practice during the day? And then maybe you can, because people do have a lot of formal practices. They run, or and you can use that as a reference, that runner's high, that feeling that you get when you swim, that, they have the practices, but trying to do it the other way does seem backwards. It seems like work, like, oh, I'm not successfully carrying the formal practice effect with me all throughout the day, and I'm failing at it. And it's hard for the brain to understand how you bring that with you all throughout the day, because you think you're getting it from the practice itself, and really what you're getting from it is building the intention and will muscle. So your approach here is to build the intention and will muscle all throughout the day, and
Yeah.
then you can notice that that's also what you've done with your other practices. But it's not about pulling that feeling with you all throughout the day. It's about creating it all throughout the day.
Absolutely. Bingo. That's 100% spot on. So if we could just focus on that 3 minutes of talk, that's perfect. So if Gene is playing tennis and he's like, oh, I just feel so good when I play tennis, I'm like, okay, Gene, what we're going to do is we're going to take those same principles that was occurring during the tennis, and we're going to take that all throughout the day. You're going to focus on something intentionally and deliberately and willfully, and we're going to put that kind of energy into all of these other activities, and we'll recreate that using those principles. So meditative technique, we take the sitting formal posture of meditation and we elongate it into everything that we do. So Donna's absolutely right. It's 100% spot on. This practice, I'm never going to tell you not to. If G wants to play tennis, fucking play tennis. Just, put some T principles in there. Don't get angry, or, pay more attention to the moment, and you're going to be a better tennis player. You're going to find flow quicker. You're going to get there quicker. You're going to perform better, and you're going to get more of that wonderful feedback from the tennis match with more T principles. So I think that's great. But T as a practice in the 4 phases does not necessarily give you or tell you to do a formal practice. And with that said, by embodying the informal practice, the formal practices will become desirable later. You'll be able to decide which formal practices you find interest in because you're following the feeling of them rather than thinking that you should or you're supposed to, or that I have to do this to create this residual feeling of yada yada all throughout the day. So this is my experience, and others are experiencing this as well. And I think that this is going to be more of the cutting edge of T, is by embodying the informal meditation posture, Donna. Now taking formal meditative posture, and I mean sitting in a deliberate way for a deliberate amount of time, in using deliberate points of attention. Formal meditation has become desirable. I want to do it. I want the stillness. I want to sit in that physical posture and feel that. So whereas before I was doing something because I thought I was supposed to, and I was forcing myself into a meditative posture, and I would gain personal power from that, intention and will, but I was forcing myself, so it wasn't the most efficient dynamic. I was using a lot of energy to do that as well. So I wouldn't, and it wasn't lasting. I wouldn't want to do it. It would be like, oh, fuck, 8 a.m. meditation time, I guess, But now, from embodying meditative technique all throughout the day, now it's like, I want to fox walk. I want to sit quietly. I want to do these things. So when we get into hydrostasy and after the T complete practice, there wouldn't surprise me at all if all of a sudden you guys want to do these formal practices of intention and will. Maybe that'll be yoga, Donna. Maybe one of these days you're just gonna just start doing it, and you'll just start doing it every day, and it'll build intention and will, and now you'll do it every day at 8 a.m. But the difference is you want to, because of the feeling. That's what it's all about. It's about feeling. And when we're getting into the later phases of this practice, we're connecting to the essence. We're connecting to the feeling of the moment, the feeling of what it. So, Gene, you're living in a house that you've lived in for a long time, right? So there's a lot of memories there, right? There's a lot of energy there, right? If you are lost in cognition, you can't feel that timelessness, the amount of, love and joy and things that you've generated. Now, if you do this practice though, and you're paying attention to the moment on purpose, and you're doing, all of a sudden, it's like this, and I'm making shit up, but it's probably something that you can relate to a little bit, is that feeling of the home, of the safety, of the love and family that you have created in that house. That essence can start to rise, and now all of a sudden you're sitting in the same fucking room that you were 20 minutes ago, lost in cognition, but now you're connecting to the essence of it, the way that it comforts you, the way that it reminds you of the love and raising the family and everybody coming together and the bonds. And then before you know it, you're writing a poem about what it's like to be in that room. That's what this practice brings out. And then we're following the feeling. And then before you know it, there's just this feeling that, hey, I liked to play tennis. I'm going to go back to that. And I'm just going to do it with my practice because I love it and it's fun and but you're still doing it. It's still now a formal practice, and you're building intention and will. So to Donna's point, and then I'll unmute you, Donna, and we could take a question, is in the world today, they show us all of these formal practices that the masters are doing. I look at this yogi, and he's sitting there quietly, no thoughts, 20 minutes, sitting perfectly. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he's so peaceful. I want that. And then I go try to do that, and I fucking hate it. It's like my mind isn't there, my body isn't there. I'm just trying to force things. And I'm like, and Donna's like, well, how did the meditation go? And I was like, it was great for 5 seconds where I found a little bit of peace. Before and after, though, it fucking sucked. Like I just forced myself into that meditative posture, and I didn't like it. So this practice is different. You can do that stuff if you're already doing it and you want to. I'm never going to tell you not to do a formal practice if you're doing it and you're gaining personal power and you enjoy it and you like it. Ida, you should continue to do your swimming if that's what you enjoy doing. I would never tell you not to. If it starts to feel like force, well, that is less important than embodying the practice. So this practice is different. Embodiment first. Find the feeling first. Start to unravel all of the untangled web throughout our day first. And then the formal practices will start to just come into our lives as we see fit. And we'll want to do it. We'll feel like doing it. That's the difference. We will feel like doing it. We'll be following the feeling of things because that's what our practice leads us to. The practice in the later phases of change are all about feeling the present moment. That's why I will redirect the thought about self and other. Because if I'm thinking about myself and other, it's not bad necessarily. It's not wrong necessarily. But if I'm doing that, I can't feel the essence of the room. I can't feel the essence of the hominess and what it's like for the family to come together and to put their energy into that space. Everybody who's ever been in that room, Gene, they've left energy in that space. It's vibrating in that room, and you can pay attention to it if you want to. Does that make sense?
Amen, homie.
So that's where I'm completely agreeing with Donna. So Mike, maybe you have dedicated practices that you in the past have enjoyed, you have found relaxation in, and if you embody this practice, all of that is all just going to be stuff that you can do with no problem. You'll find yourself every single day doing your Tai Chi practice or doing your movement practice in some way, but you'll be following the feeling. So it will be without force, without trying to control. You'll be doing it because you want to. You'll follow the feeling of it. Or you won't. Maybe formal sitting meditation will never be something that Gene chooses to do. He may choose formal walking or, formal tennis or formal golf, something like that. That's great. I don't like tennis. I've never really played tennis in my life. Well, I don't know if I don't like it. I just have never really played it. So that's, again, where also tea becomes this thing that if everybody shares, it becomes this wonderfully, diverse and unique thing. So Carly, when you're talking about more tricks of attention, to some extent, you have to invent them based around the life that you live. So if you're doing a certain type of job that I've never done before, there are ways for you to interject attention deliberately into the activity that you're doing. And I would have never thought of that because I don't do that. That's not something I've ever done. So that's where tea becomes a really diverse practice based around the same principles.
And I think it can also work the opposite way as well. Rather than practicing tea, you create informal practices. But if you already had informal practices already established, I feel like you could see principles within your formal practice because it's something that you enjoy doing already. You see that, like Donna said, you see how much peace and relaxation it brings you within the practice. For me, that's how that's how I set up some of my own tricks throughout the day. Is I would notice things within my practice, like for example, like Tai Chi. When I was doing my Tai Chi practice, I noticed my feet a lot. So I took that practice with me into my informal practice throughout the day, where I would focus on my feet and focus on the steps I take. Because when you're doing Tai Chi, you kind of focus on your step and you focus on your feet and it just all flows. So I would take those same principles into my informal practice as well. So I think it can work both ways. If you already have a formal practice established that you feel that good relaxation feeling from, you can see all of those principles within your formal practice and apply it to your informal practice as well.
Yeah, so I can break that down essentially. So let's say Donna does yoga and she has these yoga principles. One of her yoga principles is to have a relaxed body, to maybe every now and then to kind of do a little shimmy to make sure that her body's relaxed. That's a part of her formal yoga. And then she'll go into a new pose and then she'll do a little shimmy to get the energy out and then she'll go into a new pose. Some people do yoga that way. I do. When I'm doing, one posture that is yin yoga, when I go from one to the other, I do kind of a little shimmy. I shake out a little bit and kind of reset before I go into a new one. That's a part of a formal practice. But I could take that with me throughout the day. I could do this little shimmy when I go from sitting to standing, or when I go from standing to sitting, or when I go from moving to standing. I could do the little shimmy to make sure my knees are bent. So I could take my yoga posture with me throughout the day. And that's an example, I think, of what Shayna's saying. So we have the formal practice that we already do, and then we could take that with us throughout the day. I did that with Tai Chi. That's exactly what I did with Tai Chi.
Another thing I noticed, like during Tai Chi and yoga, is the principle of patience. I noticed I was so patient while I was doing my practice, my yoga or my Tai Chi. I noticed patience, and that's something I'd focus on in my informal practice as well. How patient am I being? Even I would notice it even in my walking. Sometimes there would be a rush. There was no patience. So when I would focus in and focus on the feet and the movement, I would apply the principle of patience in my informal practice as well. So there's just pops up while you're doing your formal practice, and then I would just connect it to the informal practice as well.
Mm-hmm. And just for the conciseness of language, patience isn't a principle though. So the idea of patience would be a virtue. It's a result. It's something you know, that you learn and you have because of something, like because of doing the practice, or because of, that's why we would say learn patience. We have to learn. And then what I love about what Shayna said is, when that patience is there, that's a feeling, right? Isn't patience a feeling? Like, we can feel when we're being patient. You can feel when someone's being patient and when they're not. You can focus on that feeling now. That's what we're talking about when we start to get to seers training. We start to focus on certain types of feelings, and it will make it bigger in our experience, and we can start to take that with us. So now, because I'm focusing on patience, I can be more patient. And it's a virtue of non-resistance. Yeah. Now, the only reason I say that it's not a principle is because now we could start to try to just create patience. We could try to make ourselves patient, or we would say, Gene, be patient. And it's like, okay, how? Like, okay, like, I'm trying, like, I don't know what. So patience is a virtue of non-resistance. We will be more patient automatically if we're not introducing resistance into the moment. So the principle is non-resistance. The result is patience. And what I love about what Shayna said is that we can actually start to focus on that feeling once we've developed it, and that will elongate it. And now Gene would be able to just snap his finger and focus on patience as a feeling, as a something that's happening right now. But it's still a virtue of non-resistance. A mind that is not resisting the moment can be more patient. The only thing that creates non-patience is a mind that's spinning, that's trying to control. Otherwise, you would just be patient. There's no reason to not be. Does that make sense? And just a small distinction, but I use the word principle very specifically.
It does it, yeah. Either way is fine with me.
Mm-hmm. All right, any questions? So we got about 10 or 15 minutes here. Yes, Gene. Donna.
Me?
Yes.
All right. The principles and practices, I find that I understand them, but that's only in my head. I hear the words and they all make lots of sense. The struggles that I find, even though I do feel like I have personal power in many, many things, when my day proceeds, when a half hour goes by, I find that I am in my head again. And it takes a while, still, a while being another half hour, an hour or more, before I realize that I'm in my head again. And I'm engaged there. It's a habit, I guess, and practice. I've been doing it a long time. And I engage in my head. I'm thinking about all kinds of things. And some of it I find comfortable. Some of it I find familiarity. Some of it I find, well, that's life. I mean, that's what life is, has been for a long time for me. And there are breaks. And the breaks are generally physical activity. My daughter just moved into a house. It needs a lot of work. So I go over there and I repair holes in walls, and I do spackling and I do painting. There's no thinking, I'm just doing, and I'm in flow. Or tennis, but tennis is gone now due to COVID. I won't go inside and play tennis, and I can't play outside. All the courts are unavailable. So that's gone. So I find that hours go by. Sometimes a day goes by, and I was in my head the whole day. So my challenge, this is personal now, and I don't know if it applies to anybody else, but it applies to me. I don't know if it's my nature, my ability to concentrate or focus. I forget much more than I remember. Remember happens infrequently. And so points of attention, I know all about them. I have many of them, but when but I don't find myself using them because my head is someplace else. It's doing something else. It's thinking about other things.
Yeah, so this makes sense to me. And I think the book that I'm writing, The Voice of Power, Gene, could be super beneficial for you. And it's going to be done pretty soon. And then you can let me know. But so I'm going to give you some spoilers to that book then real quick. But what you're doing here is not trying to create space. You are not trying to not think here, Gene. That's not, I have not recommended that. So that's not what we're doing here. So you look at me and you're like, oh, well, Ernest can put hours between thoughts. That's because I have been practicing this probably 100 times more than you have, for years and years and years more than you have. So to compare and contrast, that is completely erroneous and you know it. So what could help with this particular situation is understanding what we're doing in the beginning of this practice. So what is basic alignment? And then what is counterbalance? Counterbalance is using the stream of thought. You are addicted to thinking, Gene. You have been addicted to it for a long time. And I'm not telling you that you should just cut yourself off. That doesn't make any sense. That would lead to a type of shock, and it's not necessary. But there are things here that you have said that you know. It makes sense to you. We talk about it, you get it. What I'm recommending is that you can start to talk to yourself in a productive way. You can turn the stream of dialogue from something that is repetitive, habitual, and not making you feel well to something that is deliberate, contains other points of attention, and is on purpose. So your rule of 3 contains 2 points of attention plus talking to yourself. So Gene, if I were to interject myself into your situation and I find myself thinking about something again, and then I'm like, okay, that's repetitive. It's and even comfort thinking. If it's comfort thinking, just add some points of attention and continue to think it. It's okay. So if you're thinking, oh, I really like this, well, I'm thinking again. Okay, well, I'm going to hold this power object in my hand while thinking what I was already thinking, and I'm good. I'm doing my practice at least 2 degrees. That's the only criteria. At least 2 degrees, are you pointing your attention into the now moment? So if you find yourself in thought, just change the subject, but continue to talk to yourself. It's called productive self-dialogue. And if that doesn't work for you, you could do substitute dialogue. That's a little bit limited because you may not always have a recording of Alan Watts. You may not always have, a video that you can listen to. But if you do, you do. And now you can continue to use that stream of thought productively. So if I were in your situation, and I will be probably at some point today, I'm going to start to feel my mind go towards a type of cognition that I don't want. But rather than just saying, okay, no more thought for me, or I shouldn't be doing this, or, I would be so much better if all of that is leaking power, and I don't want to do that. So instead, I just change the words. I tell myself what I know. So I could tell myself, this is repetitive thought, and it's okay. But I don't have to think this. I can think other things. I can think about how beautiful this day is. I can think about how I'm alive. I still have the spark of consciousness, and that's a strong minimum. So when we say we think these things make sense, reinforce that to yourself. Start talking to yourself. Play devil's advocate with yourself. And on one side is consciousness. That's the conscious voice that's telling you that you can do this. This practice is different than anything you've ever done for the last 60 years. So it's not going to always feel easy. You know that. It makes sense. Reinforce it to yourself using productive dialogue. Right now, you are in no position to create an hour between streams of thought. Like, that requires momentum from the practice. And that just means you have to do more of the practice. And that can't be faked. We can't skip that step. It will just occur when it begins to occur. Does that make sense? So definitely in the counterbalance phase, really reinforcing our practice through verbal cognition. I would start to call that the voice of power. And then before you know it, you're about to do something stupid. And then all of a sudden that voice that you've been conditioning tells you, whoa, Gene, back up. This isn't going to work out for you. And now that is a voice, that is inner guru. It's a little bit of something that you've conditioned to a certain extent, like you've started to groom it, but also it just appeared at just the right time, at just the right moment to say just the right thing, to steer you in a more beneficial direction than where you were going. And then before you know it, we've gone from productive self-dialogue to the voice of power. And that is a voice that is occurring when you're not in resistance. The voice will still occur because we still want to communicate. Unless you've created a new way to communicate, Gene, we still got to use words to some extent, so they're still going to occur. You're never going to not think. Isn't that great? We're not trying to not think. Like, that's never going to happen. Now, I can put a long time between thoughts, but then again, there's times when I have to think, like right now. And I just put my attention on my throat chakra, and I put attention on my throat so that the words come out more smooth. So what am I doing? It's a smooth breath. I'm paying attention to a smooth breath as I speak, which is the same as this. Essentially, it's the same thing. I'm still paying attention to my breath while I speak. And then you can see it. I hold certain points of attention with my posture and everything else. I'm doing that while doing everything else. And if I start to see a battleground, I'll talk to myself about that battleground. I'll be like, Ernest, here it comes. Where's your rule of three? Where's your practice? Are you ready for this? Let's get yourself ready. Don't fuck up. Like, let's do this. You can do this. Do you see what I mean? Yes, use your thinking. And that's what this first book is all about, the voice of power. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, using my thinking might be helpful because it's predominantly my mode of behavior for 75 years. So
exactly.
So I'm good at that. I'm very good. I'm very good at that. But directing it is a whole nother issue rather than letting it go and following it. Yeah, directing.
That's different. Yeah. Letting it go and following it is a totally different feeling than directing it.
Right. Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you.
Yeah. And before you know it, you're giving classes to yourself. Like, you're sitting here giving yourself a class and telling yourself what you know and how this practice has benefited you and how you know you can do it and all of that. Remind yourself of principles. That's the type of thing that you can do as well. So, for example, oh, Mike, you got something?
Yeah, something popped in for me there. I would say letting it go if you choose to after, like right after you've realized. So like you're slow enough to realize, then you choose to let it go or follow that thought and not to take a war on that thought. This is what it is for me. Mm-hmm. Not to make war on the thought, because you're going to have thoughts and they're going to go into things that you want to do. And then you'll be in a constant war with my thought. I get into a constant war with my thought, unless I've taken the time to chill first, whatever you want to call it, mm-hmm. meditate or just be in a meditative state. Then thought is there, choose to follow it, choose not to follow it. That's how it is for me when I'm clear. And I go into exactly what Gene's talking about, through 40 years of my life. But now there may be a little bit more of a teetering to the other side where I have a little bit more remembering. But still I get caught up in thought, and then I'll have to take the time to slow down again.
Mm-hmm. And that's
sounds like Mike is talking to himself, is doing exactly what you said. It's just that letting go is a principle or an idea, a feeling that he knows, and it's familiar from maybe yoga, from whatever, from his practice. So he can see himself. One of the questions I asked in the chat when Gene was talking was, he said, I can go for a really long time thinking, and I enjoy that thinking, problem solving, how to fix the pipe, how to move the thing, whatever. It's a form of thinking that he enjoys. So he's not declaring war on it. He's not trying to let it go. But what makes you remember that you haven't been mindful in the last hour is that it doesn't feel good. Something doesn't feel good. I don't feel good. And then I go, oh, I've been thinking for the last 2 hours. That's why I don't feel good. So instead of that conversation, you can substitute it with conversation that you know is more effective toward pointing more towards the practice and not away from the practice. It doesn't feel good because I don't like the way my brother's talking to me, or it doesn't feel good because I'm trying to control this and solve this problem, and it's become a war between me and the problem. Instead of, I'm going to try this, and what does this tool feel like in my hand? This is a tool that I'm familiar with, but I've never used this brand before. What are the colors in this situation? Whatever technique, segmenting it, knowing that the battleground, like Ernest said, here it comes. Here's the part about this that I don't like. So how can I infuse my practice here by focusing on some techniques instead of the habitual repetitive responses I'm going to have to the parts of this that I don't like. So that's where segmenting, I think, is a nice technique. Here's the segment of cleaning up. Here's the segment of the figuring out segment you like. So that's not so bad. But what made you remember that you were thinking mindlessly? You weren't, that you weren't choosing your thoughts. It started to not feel good. And so looking for things to infuse at that point or engage in at that point that will from experience already from being in class, that it will lessen the resistance. It'll change. It'll be a new way of doing it. It won't be habitual and repetitive. And then you'll see what the virtues are or not after you do it. But as soon as you notice, then go to the practice. It's not, that's what Ernest still does. He just has longer periods of time between those things. I think we all sometimes get stuck in, I have to be where Ernest is. I'll never get there. It's that's a futile conversation.
Okay, yeah. So we'll just finish with this because I have to go. And I am going to do a podcast. It's probably going to be a podcast, but I'm going to do a recording while I drive. If you want to tune into that, you just come to this same Zoom room because I'm going to use the same Zoom code and everything. And I'm just going to talk about something while I'm driving. And then you can still ask questions and stuff because I'll still be able to hear you. There'll just be no video involved. The video will still be there. It'll just be muted, of course, because I'm going to use regular Zoom. Does that make sense? And I'm going to do it for the ride there and sometimes the ride back. And I'll just let you guys know in the chat what time to tune in. So sometimes it will seem improv. Okay, so I just want to mention one thing. The way that Donna and Mike and the way we've been talking about this is, so we have two fundamental things that we're doing. We're engaging the present moment using tricks of attention, and then we're also using productive self-dialogue. Really, we want to get good at both because Donna is pointing out that we don't recognize that the cognition has been unbeneficial until we don't feel good. So someone would say, well, you don't know you have a stomach until it hurts. That's okay. So if Shayna's cognition has gotten to the point where she's pissed off and then she realizes it, she's realized it. And that is great. She can move forward. However, the more we learn to hold points of attention, the more we're aware of our cognition as it happens, as opposed to after the fact or after we've already not felt good. You can get to the point where you can see your cognition and where it's going, as opposed to I'm already there at feel shitty land. Does that make sense? So this practice is still twofold. So I love that Mike, said that when he's clear, then he can do all of these different things with his cognition. And that is great. However, if we learn to hold points of attention, tricks of attention, that leads to what I call cognitive attention. You are aware of your own mind as it's occurring and not so lagged afterwards. Does that make sense? So both of these things are really important. Yes, in the beginning, we want to create the voice of power using productive cognition, productive words, the productive voice, and that's great. And then simultaneously, we're learning to hold deliberate points of attention so that we can get to the point where we're aware of this cognition as it happens, as opposed to after we've already begun to accumulate, not feel well. Does that make sense? All right, so that's all we got for today. That is the group study. And unless my schedule changes, and it might, and then I'll go to days off or something like that, but we're going to keep these two study sessions. They're going to go to YouTube now, and you'll be able to watch them for free, the replays for free. And I'm plugging it into the website so that you can still go to the website and find the videos, and it'll be really organized. Or you can just go to the YouTube channel and just watch the YouTube channel and keep up with each video that we have each week. Does that make sense? So real easy. And then we're going to do the podcast. So Jerry, you just arrived, but we're going to do the podcast on the way to work. And so that's probably I'll probably start that around, I leave at about 8:15. So probably about 8:30 or 8:45 is when I'll start that podcast. And then I'll just let you know in chat. I'll use voice to text, so don't worry. I'm not texting and driving. I'm not looking at the phone at all. Yep, and I'll let you know in chat, or Shayna can let you know and say that I'm in, and I'm just going to start talking, and it'll be recorded, voice recorded, and I'm going to put that up to the podcast. So we'll be doing a podcast almost every day. Sometimes my driving is my meditative time too, where I will drive without a thought the entire drive. So there may be times where I don't want to do a podcast because I don't want to talk. But then I'll let you know. All right. All right, cool. So on Monday, we will talk about the nature of attention again. And then we're going to have a study session on Saturday where we can talk about our practice like we did today. So it's not like a Facebook Live. No. Recorded drive. Yeah, so I'll be driving to work and then I'll record Zoom and I'll keep the audio only file. Does that make sense? And that will be uploaded to the podcast so that people can listen to that if they want to. Does that make sense? Well, okay. I will do it, Zoom. Yep, that's exactly what I'm going to do, Jerry. So I'll let you know when I'm logging it into Zoom so you guys can come and just listen. There'll just be no video though. So you'll be just listening to me like this. So I'm not obviously going to have video because I'm driving. So I'm just going to do audio only. And I may have to pause for a second. I'll say traffic or whatever, but we'll figure it out. And you can talk to me. Yes, I'll be able to hear you, Jerry. But for only as long as the headphones last. So like 45 minutes or whatever.
Back to the truck driving. I like it.
Yep. Yeah, because I'm commuting to work, so we can use that as more opportunities to share this practice. So the first 13 weeks, basic alignment. The next 13 weeks, counterbalance. The next 13 weeks, warrior training again. And then the next 13 weeks, I deliver seers training. And then that will be at the end of 2021, we have T, the complete practice from beginning to end. And then we'll probably just do it again and continue to refine it. Add more tricks of attention, continue to add more things. And now we'll start to just build on top of stuff. All that makes sense? All right, sweet. I will see you guys again soon. Thank you so much. And I'll let you guys know when we log in for the podcast. So you can, I'm just going to talk. If there's nobody there, there'll at least be Shayna. So I'll be able to talk to her at least. But you guys are more than welcome to join, ask questions, talk to me. I think that'll make for a really great, but just remember your voice is being recorded to a podcast. So don't yell at me later when you're like, oh my God, my voice is in your podcast. Well, you came to the podcast and talked. So no doubt. All right. Well, thank you guys. Have a great rest of the day, and I'll see you again soon. Monday, we have our focused group study where we'll be talking about the nature of attention. All right. I'll see you guys then. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, Ernest. Thank you so much.
Yep. You're welcome. See you guys soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yep. Thank you, guys.